Okay, hello, welcome. This is our second Gaming as Other panel for the Indie Plus Game Night for May 10th, 2014. I'm Mark Diaz Truman, one of the Indie Plus organizers, and I wanted to start off today by affirming that this event upholds the Indie Plus community standards. To find out more about the standards, Google Indie Plus community standards, and you'll find as the top link the list of community standards, which includes responsibilities and rights that belong to all Indie Plus participants. This event in particular may include discussions, must include discussions about gender and or race issues. So if that's something that you are not interested in, quick, go away now. You're going to get involved. It's almost too late. So thank you for joining us because that is exactly our topic of discussion. So I want to kick it over to Ajit to introduce himself, and we'll kind of just go down the row and have everybody talk about who they are for just a minute, and then we're going to jump into our topic for today, which is about fantasy races. And I think it'll be a good discussion. So Ajit, go ahead and get us started.
Sure, thank you, Mark. My name is Ajit George. I am professionally Director of Operations for a nonprofit. I am a veteran gamer. Tabletop and LARP are my preferred poisons. And been pretty excited to be involved in Indie Plus and discussions on race and gaming for the last, I guess, several months, maybe a year plus now, a couple of years, but certainly a topic that I've been thinking about for a while.
Awesome. Misha?
Hi, I'm Misha Bushyager, database developer by day, gamer as often as I possibly can by night. I've been gaming for probably close to 20 years now, so it's been a lot of fun. Come up with some interesting things, so we'll see what's going on.
And Strix?
Hi, I'm Strix Beltrán, and I am a gaming academic. I am currently a PhD candidate, and I study the intersection between myth and gaming. I've been a long-time gamer myself, probably more than half my life now, which I guess isn't that much, but it's something. And I am very interested in topics of race and gender in gaming. I've been kind of percolating on it and talking about it now for not close to a year, but getting there. And I'm very excited to be here today to talk about fantasy and real-life races in gaming.
Awesome. And my name's Mark. I'm one of the Indie Plus organizers. In my real life, I'm a community organizer and game developer. I also write for role-playing games, like professionally and stuff. It's just really strange, weird life. But this sort of brings together those two things in perfect harmony for me, which is talking about social justice and racial equality, and talking about games, which is something I spend a lot of my time doing. I love what Misha said, like I game as often as I can, right? And I think a lot of us are in that position. So we're excited to share some of our experiences with all of you and to hopefully feature new voices about this topic. So on that note, I want to kick it over to Strix to talk about, kind of frame today's discussion about how races, both fantasy and real, are treated in games.
Sure, so let's talk about that. Today we're going to be discussing fantasy games, mostly, though some maybe true-to-life games as well, we'll see. And we're going to be discussing sort of the intersection between fantasy races and real-life races and how they end up playing out in the gaming world. There are a lot of games who have races that are not real, right? But then there are other games that have races that are very real. For instance, Deadlands has Native Americans. There's a lot of interesting things that goes on in the relationship between real races and fantasy races. And some of them are good, and some of them are not so good. So what we're going to do today is take a look at those things and discuss them and see what everybody thinks, while also maybe providing a few pointers on how we can improve how these races are represented in our games. So I actually want to go to Misha first to hear your thoughts and to sort of open up the discussion so we can start going in one direction or the other.
Okay, so the classic example that I think of when I think of just kind of where possibly race could go wrong in a fantasy game is the Drow. I find it more problematic in LARP than I do in tabletop, just because in LARP you tend to get into the blackface issue, which, for me at least, I have a problem with when people show up in blackface. Less so when it's blue or green, but you know, still. So the Drow, you took a race, you made them intentionally black-skinned, you made them intentionally evil, and you made them intentionally not good, so not desirable in any way. And so for me, that was like a classic, why would I ever want to play a drow, and why would anybody, especially like in LARPs, like, okay, oh, wait, maybe she's a drow, but I can't tell because and so it makes like life kind of interesting. So that was my kind of classic example of it.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me jumping in there, because I think Misha's just opened up a great topic. If you look at kind of the construct of the drow, even from the beginning, even from a tabletop point of view, the drow, as Misha was saying, are evil. They are black in skin color. They are inherently evil. They live under the ground, away from the sun, away from society. They keep slaves. They enslave other races, which is really interesting. They're a matriarchal society, so they're women who are evil, black skin, live under the ground, enslave other races, and are purely they're monstrous even to themselves. They destroy each other. Their society is based on not only destroying other races and conquering other races, but destroying other races. These are very complex and problematic tropes combined together, themes and ideas that are all placed on a race that is black-skinned. And I feel like that's proxy for very difficult discourse about race or engagement with race.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think what I would call that is race conflation, right? So we took one race and we painted all of the bad things that we don't like about other races onto them. And so, in a way, I think the drow are like kings of race conflation. It's not that they just got one trait that is considered negative, right? They got all of them together in like one mega load. And so, out of all of the problematic things in fantasy race, I think the drow just sum up all of it very, very neatly. And because when you conflate races, when you say, well, this fantasy race is not really black, we're going to treat them like they are black, but we don't have to hold ourselves responsible because they're a fantasy race. They're not actually black. That's when we get into really, really problematic territory, and that's why I think actually race conflation is a bad idea. What do you think, Mark?
Well, yeah, I think when you're working with fantasy settings or sci-fi settings, which have some of the similar problems with talking about different species, like they're just like us, but they are different in some way, and then it turns out they're actually like evil, right? Like Klingons are a great example, right? I mean, and also Klingons are literally played by black people. Like it's literally like if you're on Star Trek and you're black, you're probably a Klingon. There's this, you nailed it. It's this conflation of like all these traits. So that Klingons are, aggressive and violent, and but what's interesting about Klingons is they also point to some of the good things that you can do with other cultures, which is that Klingons over time, over this life of the Star Trek universe, have become a more nuanced, thoughtful creation, right? Where they have values and traditions that are important to them that the mostly white characters have to contest with on equal footing, right? So they have to kind of engage with them as if they're really, truly traditions, like they've been in existence for thousands of years, and then they're not easily dismissed. And then, of course, it varies, like episode by episode, scene by scene. Right? There's a great YouTube cut of Picard basically telling Worf no. Like basically Worf is like, I think this is a problem, and Picard's like, no, like over and over and over. So it's not to say that it's perfect, but at least it avoids some of those problems. And I think this matters because, as Misha said, when you go to a LARP and you see people in blackface, or you sit down at a table and you listen to people be like, I'm a drow and my skin is super black and I'm super evil. Like, it's easy to say, like, oh, this is a victimless crime. Like, no one's really being hurt by me dressing up in blackface because I'm not actively owning slaves. Like, okay, yes, true. If those were the options, right? But like for me, when I was at Gen Con last year and it was like midnight and we're like out going to dinner or something, and I walked past these two people in blackface and I'm like, what? Like, seriously? And like somebody had to explain to me, like, no, people actually do that. And I was like, what? Yeah. Right? And I think when you are at the table and you're the only minority person, as I almost always am, and somebody says something like, "I'm dark-skinned and I'm really evil and I, et cetera, et cetera," it's like, whoa, like I didn't understand that was the game we're playing, and now I feel kind of strange about whether I should be here. Right? Maybe this isn't a safe space for me. Maybe this isn't a place that reflects a good environment for me. And that's something that when it's hard written into your game, or like when it's a big part of your setting, it becomes sort of pervasive.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that a little, the first time I played D&D, I didn't know about the drow, and so I'm describing my character, and I'm kind of describing Storm as an elf, and everybody's looking at me like, what, wait, why are you playing a drow? I'm like, I'm not, I'm playing Storm as an elf. But just having that baked in, if you don't know, oh, wait, why is she evil just because she's black? I don't understand. This doesn't make sense. And so that was kind of one of those cult. I'm like, no, I just want to play somebody who looks kind of like me, but maybe with cool white hair, and that sounds like, it'd be kind of fun. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things to take away from this is fantasy races are not an excuse to be racist, right? It's easier to do these things because you're not being held accountable, but that doesn't mean that you should. We often run into the basic principle that dark is bad, right? And it's ingrained in this Western culture. Like, it doesn't matter if we're talking about skin color or if we're talking about like clothing or really anything else. It's a deeply rooted sort of iconographic thing that we have in our heads. So one thing that we could do is turn it on its head, right? The dark race is good. The matriarchal race is good. And I think that would diffuse a lot of sort of the bleed that happens, the bad kind. Now, I would like to hear more on how we deal with true-to-life races, perhaps, in some of our games. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I actually wanted to jump, if you don't mind, and point out something that you just mentioned, Strix, which is it's useful to look in the context of when the Drow is painted as evil, or the Klingons are painted as evil within the first series of Star Trek. They're juxtaposed against white civilizations that are good, and so it's not simply that one is bad; it's that, like, very clearly, like, white European-style elves are good, and human societies are good. In Star Trek, the original Klingon seem either black or Arabic, a little bit of a mix of both. They are animalistic, which are often very, like, 1800s kind of tropes towards black people. It's interesting, the racial undertones, how awful they are, especially with the first series of Star Trek, in comparison to a civilized. The Federation is a very civilized. They've lost a lot of need for. They seem very enlightened individuals, and in comparison to the Klingons, which are very primitive and animalistic kind of races. And so, turning that on its head, as you were saying a minute ago, Strix, is a really interesting way of engaging that.
I agree.
And it points towards, I think, how we handle races in other games, too. So, like, I used to run a Werewolf the Forsaken LARP for, like, 4 years, right? And, number one, we talked about erasure before. I realized that even though I was running the LARP and it was set in New Mexico, I was often erasing Latino characters and making all the characters white, just because, like, that's just sort of like, I was just defaulting them. Like, oh, yeah, this guy looks like, people in movies, so it just came out white and white and white. So, like, points back to this being an intersectional problem of erasure and conflation, where we erase those characters, and then the ones we do allow, we conflate, like, all these bad things of them. But one of the challenges I faced was, like, okay, so clearly in Albuquerque, there are Latino gang members who the werewolves would run into. Like, they have their own territory. The gang members probably also think about this area as their territory. Like, territory is very important to gangs and the way gangs think. And so, like, they're going to run into each other, right? Okay, so how do I do that without being like, hey, here's some, like, Latinos who don't like werewolves? I don't even know, like, what, like, like, how do we present that? And, World of Darkness in general is pretty neutral on this subject. Like, there's not a lot in the books about how to deal with it. And so, there's other games that we talk about, like Deadlands, that are not so neutral about how to deal with it. And I'm eager to hear from others about their experiences. So I know that was really tough for me to kind of, like, make a productive kind of presence and not just be like, here are some Black and Latino people who are criminals because that's like the background radiation of my interactions with fiction.
Yeah. Strix, you maybe had some ideas about like discussing the Native Americans in Deadlands. I know that was
I actually just came off of a Deadlands tabletop game, and I was playing, a Hispanic person, but a Hispanic person that had a relationship with local Native Americans. And there's a mechanic in Deadlands where you can be, I can't even believe I'm going to say this out loud, addicted to peyote. Which is so problematic that I don't even really know where to begin. Like, first of all, peyote is not an addictive substance, and second of all, it's actually a sacred medicinal plant in their culture. And so there's no way for you to interact with this, right, without being punished by the mechanics in the game, which I think in general is really problematic for any game. When you're punishing a racial or cultural thing with the mechanic, you get a -1. If you don't do this, you get punished by having that culture enforced. I think that is really the wrong way, actually, to incorporate culture and race into a game. Now, we've often talked about on previous panels, if you want people to embrace a culture, you enforce it mechanically, right? Well, this would be an example of not doing that in the right way. If you're going to enforce race or culture mechanically, you should do it in a positive way, I think, and not, again, punish people for it. Deadlands in general, I think, is just really highly problematic as a game in how it deals with race and culture, and I'm sure you guys probably agree with me a little bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a few years since I played Deadlands. What I remember of it, it was... wait, what? Okay, no. So, I mean, we ended up stripping out some of that when we played with house rules, just because it was like, no, I can't do this. This doesn't make sense. We're just going to play it. We'll keep some of these, and we're going to throw out some of these and call it a day. But because it was... you got way too much of that noble savage trope, which kind of drives me batty. It's like, okay, they're different. That doesn't necessarily mean they're animalistic. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're dirt worshipping. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're, anything weird. Their culture is no stranger than our culture, as far as there are some kind of interesting things about Christianity that if you compare it to like any other culture, it's like any other religion, it's like not really seeing too much difference. I'm not seeing where you have room to throw stones. So from that point of view...
Sorry, I was just going to say the noble savage trope ends up dehumanizing an individual. It takes away their humanity and creates them as a one-dimensional aspect of a human being. They have the same. We, as others, have the same loves, hopes, desires, needs, but we end up getting painted by a single brush that creates our entire culture and our people. And fantasy races become proxies for that, and very deceptively so. It treats race very one-dimensionally and skews the worst elements in the process.
Yeah. I think there's some, as a designer, I look to a couple of places to help me avoid this. One of them is bulldogs. Brennan Taylor did a great job with saying, okay, there are different species, they do have different cultures, but when you choose aspects, you don't get like the one aspect for your species. You get to choose from a list of things this culture cares about, or just like make up your own because you're just like one individual. That's just one example of like good work being done to like complicate this idea, right? And I think again it points to like we talked about with erasure. The answer is not like talk to the people, minorities in your life, and they will bestow wisdom upon you until like you fix this problem. It's like complicate, nuance. Remember that people are individuals. Like remember, as Ajit just said, like that we love and hope for the same things. And even if elves aren't human, like they care about radically different things. They care about something, and their culture must have some value, or else it already would have like splintered and fallen apart and been like it doesn't make any goddamn sense. So, like elves are all evil, but somehow they managed to hold it together. It's just like what?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Cannibalistic societies can only survive until there's no more cannibals.
Yeah, right. It just doesn't make any sense. So.
Yeah. No, it's exciting to see stuff like Bulldogs. You know, I know Luke Crane with Burning Wheel did some interesting stuff with stock. You know, there is definitely, it's clearly the path is there, and it's great to see game designers looking at it in very progressive ways and engaging in a different light. And I'd love to encourage and see more of that.
Awesome. Good, cool. Well, we want to wrap up for today. We're trying to keep these short so they're nice and bite-sized for folks. If you've got ideas for other topics you want us to talk about, please post as the comments about some questions you might have about race. We're happy to talk about them next month or the month after. And I'd like to thank our guests today, Ajit and Misha and Strix, and just really appreciate all the great work that's being done, and Indy Plus really appreciates it too. So thanks for watching, and we look forward to the next Gaming as Other panel.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.